Part 2, The Castrating Shadow of St. Garta. The image of Kafka that is widely held these days comes originally from a novel. Max Brod wrote it immediately after Kafka's death and published it in 1926. Savor the title, The Enchanted Kingdom of Love, Zauberreich der Liebe. This key novel is a roman à clef, a novel with a key. Its protagonist, a German writer in Prague named Naui, is recognizably a flattering self-portrait of Brod, adored by women, envied by the literati. Naui/Brod cuckolds a man who, by very elaborate wicked schemes, gets him sent to prison for 4 years. We are instantly plunged into a story cobbled together by the most improbable coincidences. Characters meet by complete chance on a ship out at sea, on a Hafe street, on a street in Vienna. We witness the struggle between the good, Noe and his mistress, and the evil, the cuckold, so vulgar that he fully deserves his horns, and a literary critic who systematically pans Naui's wonderful books. We are pained by melodramatic reversals. The heroine kills herself because she cannot bear life caught between the cuckold and the cuckolder. We admire the sensitive soul of Naui Brod, who swoons regularly. This novel would have been forgotten before it was written if not for the character of Garta. Because Garta, Noe's close friend, is a portrait of Kafka. Without this key, the character would be the most uninteresting in the entire history of literature. He is described as a, quote, saint of our time, end of quote. But even about the ministry of his saintliness, we don't learn much, except that from time to time, when Noe Brod is having love troubles, he seeks advice from his friend, which the friend, as a saint with no such experience, is incapable of giving him. What a marvelous paradox. The whole image of Kafka and the whole posthumous fate of his work were first conceived and laid out in this simple-minded novel, this garbage, this cartoon novel concoction, which aesthetically stands at exactly the opposite pole from Kafka's art. Some quotations from the novel. Garta, quote, was a saint of our time, a veritable saint, end of quote. Quote, perhaps his best quality was his remaining so independent and free, so saintly, rational in the face of all mythologies, even though deep down he was akin to them and nearly a mythological figure himself, end of quote. Quote, he wanted to live in perfect purity. Rather, he could not do otherwise, end of quote. The words saint, saintly, mythological, purity are not a matter of rhetoric. They are to be taken literally. Of all the sages, quote, of all the sages and prophets who have walked the earth, he was the quietest. Perhaps he lacked one thing, self-confidence. With it, he would have become a guide to humanity. No, he was not a guide. He spoke neither to the people nor to disciples, like the Buddha, Jesus, Moses. He did not speak that way. He remained reticent. Was that because he saw more deeply into the great mystery than those three? Because what he undertook was more difficult yet than what the Buddha intended? Because if he succeeded, it would be conclusive? End of quote. And again, quote, all the founders of religions were sure of themselves. One of them, however, he may well be the most sincere of all, Lao Tzu, retreated into the shadows. Garta certainly did the same, end of quote. Garta is presented as someone who writes. Noe, quote, had agreed to be Garta's literary executor. Garta had asked him to do this, but with the unusual condition that everything be destroyed, end of quote. Naui, quote, sensed the reason for that last wish. Garta was not announcing a new religion. He wanted only to live his faith. He required the ultimate effort of himself. As he had not succeeded, his writings, mere rungs to help him climb to the heights, had no value for him. Still, Noe/Brod did not want to obey his friend's wish because in his view, Garta's writings, quote, even as attempts, as mere sketches, bring to wandering humanity a presentiment of something irreplaceable, end of quote. Yes, it's all there. Were it not for Brod, we would not even know Kafka's name today. Right after his friend's death, Brod saw to the publication of his 3 novels. No reaction. So he realized that to establish Kafka's work, he would have to undertake a real and long war. Establishing a body of work means presenting it, interpreting it. Broad opened a veritable artillery attack. Prefaces for the trial, 1925. For the castle, 1926. For America, 1927. For, quote, description of a struggle, end of quote, 1936. For the diaries and letters, 1937. For the stories, 1946. For the conversations by Gustave Janouche, 1952. Then the dramatizations of The Castle, 1953, and America, 1957. But above all, 4 important books of interpretation. Take good note of the titles. Franz Kafka, a biography, 1937. The Faith and Teachings of Franz Kafka, 1946. Franz Kafka, He Who Shows the Way, 1951. And Despair and Salvation in the Work of Franz Kafka, 1959. Through all of these texts, the image outlined in The Enchanted Kingdom of Love is confirmed and developed. Above all, Kafka is primarily the religious thinker, der Religionsdenker. True, he, quote, never systematically set out his philosophy and his religious worldview. Nonetheless, we can deduce rather clear fundamentals from his work, from his aphorisms especially, but also from his poetry, his letters, his diaries, and then also from his way of life. From that above all, end of quote. Further on, Kafka's true importance cannot be understood, quote, unless 2 currents in his work are distinguished. 1, the aphorisms. 2, the narrative writings, novels, stories, fragments. In his aphorisms, Kafka expounds the positive word, das positive Wort, that he gives to mankind, a faith, a stern call for each individual to change his own life, end of quote. In his novels and stories, quote, he describes the horrible punishments in store for those who do not wish to hear the word, das Wort, and do not follow the path of righteousness, end of quote. Note the hierarchy. At the top, Kafka's life as an example to be followed. In the middle, the aphorisms, that is all the meditative, quote, philosophical, end of quote, passages in his diaries. At the bottom, the narrative works. Broad was a brilliant intellectual with exceptional energy, a generous man willing to do battle for others. His attachment to Kafka was warm and disinterested. The only problem was his artistic orientation. A man of ideas, he knew nothing of the passion for form. His novels, he wrote 20 of them, are sadly conventional, and above all, he understood nothing at all about modern art. Why, despite all this, was Kafka so fond of him? What about you? Do you stop being fond of your best friend because he has a compulsion to write bad verse? But the man who writes bad verse turns dangerous once he starts to publish the work of his poet friend. Suppose the most influential commentator on Picasso were a painter who could not even manage to understand the Impressionists. What would he say about Picasso's paintings? Probably the same thing Broad said about Kafka's novels, that they describe, quote, the horrible punishments in store for those who do not follow the path of righteousness, end of quote. Max Brod created the image of Kafka and that of his work. He created Kafkology at the same time. The Kafkologists may distance themselves from their founding father, but they never leave the terrain he mapped out for them, despite the astronomical number of its texts. Kafkology goes on elaborating infinite variants on the same discussion, the same speculation which, increasingly unconnected to Kafka's work, feeds only on itself. Through innumerable prefaces, postfaces, notes, biographies, and monographs, university lectures and dissertations, Kafkology produces and sustains its own image of Kafka to the point where the author, whom readers know by the name Kafka, is no longer Kafka, but the Kafkologized Kafka. Number 1, following Broad's example, Kafkology examines Kafka's books not in the large context of literary history, the history of the European novel, but almost exclusively in the micro context of biography. In their monograph, Boyce Defry and Alberes cite Proust rejecting biographical explication of art, but only to say that Kafka requires exception to that rule, as his books are, quote, not separable from his person, whether he's called Joseph K., Rohan, Samsa, the Surveyor, Benjamin, Josephine the Singer, the Hunger Artist, or the Trapeze Artist. The hero of his books is none other than Kafka himself, end of quote. Biography is the principal key for understanding the meaning of the work. Worse, the only meaning of the work is a key for understanding the biography. 2. Following Broad's example in the hands of the Kafkologists, Kafka's biography becomes hagiography, such as the unforgettable bombast with which Roman Karst ended his talk at the famous 1963 conference on Kafka and Czechoslovakia. Quote, "Franz Kafka lived and suffered for us," end of quote. Various kinds of hagiography, religious, secular, Kafka, martyr to his solitude, leftist, Kafka, assiduously attending anarchist meetings and very interested in the 1917 revolution, according to a mythomaniacal assertion frequently cited but never verified. To every church, its apocrypha. Conversations with Kafka by Gustav Janusz. To every saint, a sacrificial gesture. Kafka's wish to have his work destroyed. 3. Following Broad's example, Kafkology systematically dislodges Kafka from the domain of aesthetics, either as a religious thinker or else, on the left as a protester against art, whose, quote, ideal library would include only books by engineers or mechanics, and declaratory jurists, end of quote, in the book by Deleuze and Guattari. Kafka is tireless in examining his connections to Kierkegaard, to Nietzsche, to the theologians, but ignores the novelists and poets. Even Camus, in his essay, discusses Kafka in terms one would use not for a novelist, but for a philosopher. His private writings are treated the same way as his novels, but with a marked preference for the former. Taking at random the Kafka essay Roger Goraldi wrote while he was still a Marxist. 54 times he quotes Kafka's letters, Kafka's diaries 45 times, the Janusz conversations 35 times. The stories 20 times, the trial 5 times, the castle 4 times, America not once. 4. Following Broad's example, Kafkology ignores the existence of modern art as though Kafka did not belong to the generation of the great innovators. Stravinsky, Webern, Bartók, Apollinaire, Musil, Joyce, Picasso, Braque, all born like him between 1880 and 1883, when in the 1950s someone proposed the notion of his kinship with Beckett, Broad immediately protested. St. Goethe has nothing to do with such decadence. 5. Kafkology is not literary criticism. It does not examine the value of the work, the previously unknown aspects of existence that the work reveals, the aesthetic innovations by which it affected the evolution of the art, etc. Kafkology is an exegesis. As such, it can see only allegories in Kafka's novels. They are religious. Broad, the castle equals the grace of God, the surveyor, the new Parsifal in quest of the divine, etc., etc. They are psychoanalytical, existentialistic, Marxist. The surveyor equals a symbol of revolution because he undertakes land redistribution. They are political, Orson Welles' The Trial. Kafkology does not look to Kafka's novels for the real world transformed by an immense imagination. Rather, it decodes religious messages. It deciphers philosophical parables. Quote, Goethe was a saint of our time, a veritable saint, end of quote, but can a saint go to brothels? When Broad published Kafka's diaries, he censored them somewhat. He deleted not only the allusions to whores, but anything else touching on sex. Kafkology has always expressed doubts about its subject's virility, and it delights in discussing the martyrdom of his impotence. Thus, Kafka long ago became the patron saint of the neurotic, the depressive, the anorexic, the feeble, the patron saint of the twisted, the precieuses ridicules, and the hysterical. In the Orson Welles film, Kay howls hysterically, whereas Kafka's novels are the least hysterical in the entire history of literature. Biographers know nothing about the intimate sex lives of their own wives, but they think they know all about Stendhal's or Faulkner's. About Kafka's, I would dare say nothing but this, the, parentheses, not very easy, end of quote, erotic life of his time had little resemblance to ours. Girls in those days did not make love before marriage. For a bachelor, that left only two possibilities: married women of good family, or easy women of the lower classes. Shop girls, maids, and of course prostitutes. The imagination of Broad's novels drew on the first source, whence their kind of eroticism, rapturous, romantic, involving dramatic cuckoldries, suicides, pathological jealousies, and asexual. Women are wrong, quote, women are wrong to believe a good man cares only about physical possession. That is merely a symbol and is by far less important than this feeling. The woman loves me, and so she is entirely well disposed toward me. All of man's love seeks to win woman's goodwill and kindness. End of quote. That's from The Enchanted Kingdom of Love. The erotic imagination in Kafka's novels, on the contrary, draws almost exclusively on the other source. Quote, I walked past the brothel as though it were the house of a beloved, end of quote. Diary, 1910. Sentence censored by Broad. Masterful as they were at analyzing all the strategies of love, 19th century novels left sex and the sexual act itself hidden. In the first decades of our century, sex emerged from the mists of romantic passion. Kafka was one of the first, certainly along with Joyce, to uncover it in his novels. He unveiled sex not as the playing field for a small circle of libertines in 18th century style, but as a commonplace, fundamental reality in everyone's life. Kafka unveiled the existential aspects of sex in conflict with love, the strangeness of the other as a condition, a requirement of sex, the ambiguous nature of sex, those aspects that are exciting and simultaneously repugnant, its terrible triviality, which in no way lessens its frightening power, etc. Broad was a romantic. By contrast, at the root of Kafka's novels, I believe I discern a profound anti-romanticism. It shows up everywhere in the way Kafka sees society as well as in the way he constructs a sentence. But its origin may lie in Kafka's vision of sex.